Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Lane County Board of Commissioners work session meeting today for this October 25th. Today's item is a discussion regarding the coordinated downtown development, and I would like to welcome some special guests. Judge Rasmussen, Presiding Judge Rasmussen is with us today. We also have our District Attorney, Patty Perlow, and our acting sheriff right now, Cliff Harold. So welcome and thank you for being here. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn this over to Greg or Brian.
We'll go ahead and start with Brian. Do you want to just jump
absolutely.
right in?
Appreciate having everybody together in the room again as a follow-up to our joint elected officials meeting last week with some additional attendees, which will be great resources for the discussion I anticipate today. They've been involved in this process all the way back to our initial needs assessment, and now as we make some more strategic decisions with regard to future development, their input I think is very helpful and important. So appreciate having everybody in the room. I plan to start by going over a lot of what was discussed at last week's joint elected officials meeting, just briefly, and then dive into some additional information in an effort to be responsive to some of the feedback we heard at that meeting. So just to start off, kind of going back with my project management hat on, talking about the tasks we're working on and what we're trying to fit into the 12 weeks we've been given to do this work in. Well, obviously through project initiation, research and data gathering, programming and templates, and really into the development concepts, and that's why we're here today, to have additional discussion and receive additional direction from the board with regard to how we pursue those development concepts, refine those development concepts, and ultimately incorporate them into the final report. Getting back to the schedule, the blue line keeps marching on. I haven't found a way to stop it. So here we are at our meeting of the board. Tomorrow the City Council is going to have a meeting, kind of a similar approach, looking at City Hall Phase 1 and Phase 2 in these scenarios and providing additional direction to their staff that we can then share with the task force. So the next 2 days, we're really excited about what additional direction and information we gather so that we can proceed and sprint to the finish there on November 14th with the final 3 scenarios that we're looking to detail for the board and the City Council. Again, going back and touching on what it is we're trying to accommodate, we've got City Hall Phase 1, Phase 2, the county courthouse, as well as the farmer's market. Your packet has a more detailed breakdown of the square footage needs associated with each. They're color-coded here in an effort to assist you when we get to the model building. What color represents what more specifically? One of the items we've been soliciting feedback on, not only from the board and the City Council, but the public and the local AIA chapter, is a document we've been referencing as the prerequisites and considerations for the project. This is really meant to be a tool that helps highlight the important factors that the elected officials and other stakeholders would like to have highlighted in the final report so that we can bring it front and center when the final report comes forward. They're grouped into a few different categories: site, context, transportation costs, and some of the additional work that would be required to pursue each of the concepts. Underneath, you have these documents in your packet, and under each there's several items posed in the form of a question that we'll try to be responsive to in the final report to help you navigate all the information I'll be giving to you. So if there's anything in addition to what's on this list that you would like us to bring forward, remain mindful of, and highlight in the final report, we're actively soliciting those suggestions, and happy to receive those by email or in any other means you can get them to us. Now, going back to the preliminary development scenarios we discussed last week at the joint elected officials meeting, our consultants initially looked at all the program requirements and the sites available and came up with 12. Just kind of by applying good design practice and identifying conflicts, we were able to narrow those to 6. When we say 6, there's really the 3 basic scenarios that we're pursuing, but 2 different options under each that reflect a number of different arrangements of the moving parts. So scenario A, commonality amongst A1 and A2 is that City Hall Phase 1 is at the site of the former City Hall, and the courthouse is at the Butterfly Lot. The A scenarios more or less reflect the approach that's been pursued to date in terms of citing City Hall on city-owned property and the courthouse and county-owned property. Scenario B is a shift from that in that it cites the courthouse and the City Hall on the same block, which is the site of the former City Hall site, opening up the butterfly lot to other development. And then scenario C is a true swap of the properties or exchange of the properties where the courthouse gets sited on the side of the former City Hall block and the City Hall, at least phase one, gets sited on the butterfly lot. So these are, as we presented them last week, are preliminary. We want to refine those as soon as possible so that the task force can get around an A scenario, a B scenario, and a C scenario, so we can refine those, apply cost estimates, and really detail those out for the report that we plan to present to you on November 14th. And it's really the task that's in front of us right now. Here's a graphical representation that we of the snapshots of the models that we shared with you last week. And at that meeting, there's two primary requests for additional information that we identified. One was around parking, and another was around costs associated with the different scenarios. And so I apologize, up on the screen, this is going to be hard to read. We're trying to print this material out for you, and it's available online. But I did want to share with you, while we haven't solved all the parking challenges, I want to share with you that we are working on that as a topic to be included in the final report. Currently, we've been able to inventory all the existing city and county-owned parking that's available. We also are familiar with a number of reasonably anticipated developments that are going to eliminate certain surface parking in the area, so that'll be an impact in addition to what we do as part of this coordinated development. And so we're beginning to have a good quantification of what it is and the deficit that would be created by any of these concepts. If you move on to the A scenario, there's a number of opportunities below the development that's contemplated in the A scenario to create below-grade parking. In addition, there's an opportunity to expand our existing parking on the PSB parking structure, which is just north of the Umpqua Bank along 6th Avenue. So in each of these scenarios, as we continue to refine them, we'll be highlighting those opportunities to expand and address any of the parking deficits that may be created or reasonably anticipated. Similarly, in the B scenario, there's opportunities below those building footprints to provide additional parking. And in the C scenarios, there's opportunities. So we've tried to quantify what those opportunities are. We'll certainly be working to assign costs to those so they can be evaluated as part of the final deliberations after November 14th. But at this point, I just wanted to share with you where we're at on that topic. And then finally, when it comes to costs, we did do a lot of work since our last JEO meeting with our cost consultant in Portland to help refine and define some of the costs associated with these different scenarios. And when it comes to the decision point, or at least what we're facing in terms of refining these concepts and trying to decide between A1 and A2, B1 and B2, and C1 and C2, I think the most productive thing I tried to do with this slide and this item here today was to highlight the differences in those scenarios from the perspective of the county and the courthouse project. In any scenario, we're doing new construction for the courts and their related functions. Each scenario can afford enough below-grade parking to meet the minimum need of the functions in the courthouse. And in fact, in any scenario, there's an opportunity to provide even additional spaces beyond that. Really the distinguishing factor, and it's really between A1 and A2 and B1 and B2, is whether we leverage the existing courthouse and remodel that subsequent to the courts vacating that to meet the needs of the DA and the sheriff into the future, rather than only a courthouse that's comprehensive enough to house them. Some of the themes that are coming out with our cost estimating as we look into the current courthouse with the amount of asbestos and seismic vulnerability is that the cost of new construction versus the cost of remodeling that space are really almost coming into alignment in a lot of ways when you account for the comprehensive nature of a remodel to make that building function far into the future. So when it comes to leveraging that space, there's some challenges just given its age and its and the components that go into that. So I was going to leave you with this slide and turn it over for discussion. Hopefully this can be a tool. Again, I want to be cautious not to delve into that we like or preferences over A, B, or C. Really, as a task force, what we need to accomplish is A1 versus A2, B1 versus B2, C1 versus C2, and being mindful that the city council will have a meeting tomorrow similar to ours, and to the extent that we can help signal our preferences to them, the task force will be in a better position for the final 2 weeks of the project. So I'll turn it over to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks. I'd like to start with just a question that came up in my mind here. So under all the scenarios of A, B, and C, in your mind, and I know it might be different in the states, but in your mind, do all those scenarios allow us the potential to get the 50% reimbursement from the state, or are there like option 1A and B1, those options would we not receive because of the co-located? What are your thoughts on that?
The assumption for each, thank you, it's a great question. The assumption for each of these is when we list courts and court-related functions, that includes the state office space that is necessary to justify the 50% match from the state. So in either of these scenarios, in the massing, that space is allocated for in the new construction in these models. There may be some opportunity for interpretation of the statute that means co-location means nearby, as we define our project more specifically. But for the purposes of this exercise, we've included the state offices as part of the courts, and that justifies the 50% match.
Okay, and just one further question on that. So I'm going to assume that if we have to do some remodeling on the existing courthouse, that's probably not going to qualify for any additional.
Correct. So the match applies to the courts and the state offices. So regardless of whether the square footage for the DA and sheriff are in the new building or remodeled elsewhere, that is ineligible for the matching funds from the state. There's some opportunity for fixed costs associated with the building if you insert the DA and the sheriff. Those will be shared in terms of site improvements, et cetera. In terms of the square footage, it's actually assignable to functions that aren't state or aren't the courts, kind of one and the same, but state or the courts, those are not eligible for the match regardless of where they're located.
Okay, all right, thanks for that clarification. Commissioner Liker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions, Brian. First of all, on a potential match, I know with ODOT, in-kind is included as potential match. Would in-kind be potentially used as a match for a project like this?
In terms of ODOT offices?
No, I'm just using them as a state,
as an example.
state agency.
Yes.
as an example.
So given the funding structure and the program they developed, that they would, for the state offices and the courts, the 50% would go towards the cost of construction as well as the value of the land. So whether we own it or purchase it, that's part of the match as well. So it's kind of considered in kind if we own it. And then what they ask for as return is a leasehold interest in all that space for the life of the bonds at no cost to the state. So that's kind of the structure we're working under. But there is opportunities. The program's been really good about design costs, value of land, whether already county owned or not. So I think there is opportunities for in-kind credit.
And another question is, so the scenario I see mostly is the 240,000 square foot facility for the courthouse. Have other scenarios been discussed that may have that reduced, maybe to 150 to 175,000 square feet?
Yeah, the needs assessment was based on a number of assumptions which we had to make given the preliminary nature of the work. And so there's a number of factors that were included. We were able to define the individual spaces fairly clearly, both out of design. It was hard to account for all the other circulation space and entry and site work. And so there's a number of factors that were included to account for that space that could probably be more efficiently addressed through design once we get into that process. Additionally, there's allocation for state offices that was fairly generous in that 240,000 square feet. We're already having meetings with those agencies and refining that space needs. So I'm confident that through design it'll be something less than 240,000 square feet, but based on our preliminary planning, that's the figure we've been using.
Okay, and one last question I don't expect an answer today whatsoever. In fact, this is one that's probably potentially down the road. So obviously there's one city councilor one city councilor would really like the city hall be moved down to EWeb. And I don't know where the votes are or anything like of that sort. Has the city of Eugene talked to some of the commercial realtors to take a look at what the fair market value would look like on the city hall site if it were rezoned to mixed use? I don't need an answer today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Farr?
I just have a single question, and it's regarding parking. You stated that the underground parking under the courthouse would accommodate all the courthouse's needs. And then you made a statement regarding the DA's needs and the sheriff's needs. So we're looking at more than just the courthouse needs. You know, we're replacing, in these scenarios, replacing the butterfly parking lot, which is more than the courthouse. So. And you said there are a few additional spaces potentially available in some of these scenarios. It wouldn't, I'm trusting it would not fully accommodate the displaced spaces from the butterfly lot, and that some of these other sketches on this one page, on page 20 or 24, it talks about some of the other possibilities for parking.
Right, and you know, that kind of gets into the categories of parking. I mean, there's the below the building secure parking for officials and folks that need that sort of direct access to the courts, and we've really worked hard to make that number the most modest possible, so that we're really building only to what we have to. But then there's another level of whether it's the patrol cars for the sheriff or a number of other folks that interact with the courts that need secure parking. It would be great if it was under the building, but it needs to be at least adjacent, so they kind of fall into another category. And then you keep working your way out, and including the constituents we serve and the staff that work here daily. And so, and each one of those has a little different need. You know, not every one of those is the spot below the building, but some of them are across the street, and some of them can be 2 blocks on the street. So that kind of gets at the work we have in the 2 weeks ahead of us. I think we've got a good understanding of where the parking capacity is now, how it's going to be impacted by this development, other planned development, and then we're really going to have to highlight the opportunities to accommodate what's going to be an increased demand through any of this development.
Your answer satisfied my question quite well. We're not talking about funding mechanisms today at this point, other than what Commissioner Larkin brought up, which is obviously a large part of the discussion. But for instance, if we do need to add parking structures in the future, whether it be expand the umpqua lot, whatever it may be, the funding mechanisms, there are very funding mechanisms we would use for that. For instance, TRT.
And when it comes to the final report and items we'll highlight, I think there's this category for additional work required, and parking is absolutely one where we'll try to highlight the additional efforts that can be undertaken to help define that better, whether it's on the funding side or the engineering side or whatever it might be to round out those solutions for you.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay. So the hope today is to work through the A scenarios, B scenarios, and C scenarios, and try to get some direction as to what is a preferred option, if we can, of each scenario. Is that correct?
Yeah, you've got it absolutely correct. And I just highlight to you that when it comes to the courthouse and our project, when it was the county's project, the C scenarios are essentially the same. So it's not necessarily as daunting
So we
of a
can take
task when
C
it comes
off.
to C.
Yeah. But I do think that there might be some comments that our partners here today, whether it's the courts or the sheriff or the district attorney, that may want to give comments on all the scenarios. We want to make sure that we hear all those too. So do we want to just start with scenario A? And
Sure, I'll try to kind of set it up for discussion if you'd like, Chair. When it comes to scenario A, the primary difference from the court's perspective, again, there's a lot of moving parts on the city side as well, is whether we build for the full 240,000 square foot program on the butterfly lot and vacate the current courthouse for other functions, whether they be county or supposedly city or private or whatever that may be, or even demolition and reimagining that property. So that's a decision point there, going back to the fact that, how do I frame this decision? So in the near term, the cost of accommodating the DA and the sheriff in the new facility is probably not at a great premium over remodeling the existing space. The issue becomes how big that facility gets and how much that initial project costs. as opposed to being able to reimagine the existing courthouse for the tenants that would remain there over the course of time and spreading that cost out. So from a capital planning perspective, I guess that's what I'd offer as kind of considerations for that decision.
Okay.
Just maybe you can remind us what the size of the building would be in option A2, that the number of floors in particular, and then how that relates to other buildings in the downtown area. I thought that was one of the significant considerations.
I think Larry's got that memorized better than I do.
Memorized, I'm not sure. I know that,
Larry, if you can, could you
Come on
join
over
us
so
at
they
the
can
table,
catch you on
please?
the mic next.
right, and I don't know if we need to, we could get to we have the model, the SketchUp model, which allows us to be able to see the floors a little better, and also we can measure the building heights for any of the ones.
He can't drive it either.
I can drive it. I can find it.
The reason I offer that is I think that
How do we get
is
it on the
valuable
screen then?
information and is a clear distinction between those two options, A1 and A2, that may help inform the board's decision.
X it out of that.
I apologize.
Presume roughly 10, 15 feet higher than Hilton.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If that's helpful.
It's about 140 feet, and this doesn't mean that it would probably have a penthouse or a parapet wall around it, so it might be a little bit taller. So it would be taller than the Citizens Bank. Citizens Bank building is 11 stories, and it's 130 feet. So this would be about a story, A1 would be about a story to a story and a half taller than the Citizens Bank building. And of the three buildings we modeled,
That would be A2, right? Or-
Yeah, you're right.
Exactly.
Sorry,
Here's
my
the- This
mistake.
is the height. This is as tall as we go.
that's as tall as we go.
Of all 6 scenarios.
Of all 6 scenarios, this is the biggest building.
Smallest footprint.
And
of the whole
for
room.
both of the A scenarios, the Sally Port would be on the Park Street side. It wouldn't work well on Oak, and it's certainly not long enough to function adequately on either 7th or 8th. So it would be on the Park Street side. Both of the A scenarios would eliminate any opportunity to recapture any of the park blocks, obviously. The building would take over almost that entire northwest block, if you will.
Another point I'll highlight is the program for the sheriff and the DA is somewhere on the order of 93,000 square feet. In the courthouse, the existing courthouse is 112, so there is some surplus of space in there, fairly modest, but to expand into that space, there would be the existing courthouse has an excess of square footage, so.
Huh? I can't see it on the screen. No, I have to do it on there? Sorry. Where's the mouse? There it is. So you can see that this is the scenario with the Sky Bridge and the repurposed, remodeled court building. So you can see that the building is reduced. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like 6 or 7 stories. 6 stories.
Was there some feedback at the AIA chapter meeting about heights of buildings? And I don't know if
There
it's
was,
informative or-
no, a lot of the architects felt that it wouldn't be bad to have taller buildings and a shorter footprint, if you will, or a smaller footprint for some of the buildings. When we were doing the City Hall design originally, thinking about the Phase 2 City Hall, it was always anticipated there might be an 8 to 10 story building on the north side of the City Hall site for that building. So there was some consideration from the architects saying taller buildings might be okay in these scenarios. I'm not sure how well that works with the court and its program. If you get a taller building, then you've got courts on multiple floors, and obviously they need to be, pairs of courtrooms, next to each, so you need to have 2 courts at least on each floor, and I'm not sure how many. Again, that's a design issue, but we haven't really looked at anything other than starting from the NCSC study, which really looked at a 5-story building, if you will, and below-grade parking, structured parking.
Okay. Comments? Mr. Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for the record, we took a block and blocked off a street in Springfield for the Justice Center. So, and heard a couple of complaints for about a month, but people's patterns change. And since then, I don't think people even realize that B Street used to go through. So and this is, we're just talking about in Justice Center and police facility only. Whether, and I know there's quite a bit more population, more pedestrian traffic in this area. I think ultimately people could change their habits, if we're interested in moving that direction. But I just want to make sure we point out it was done in Springfield and has been successful since then. So if that's an option. I don't know, Judge Rasmussen, would you like to have like a 12-story office?
Well,
Presiding
this is,
judge?
as Larry said, I'd love to have a 12-story building if I've got the office on top. But the reality is that, although we're mostly talking about massing, from a design standpoint, creating some flexibility on the floor means having a little bit greater footprint on the floor. So, for example, we wouldn't necessarily have 5 big courtrooms. We might have a couple of big courtrooms, a couple of medium, and a couple of small, or some combination of that. Bigger footprint gives us probably more options in that regard. And that makes going taller and thinner a little bit more problematic.
And that's what the SCS study said. It had 6 courts on 3 floors, small, medium, and large on each floor. 2 of each.
And just to follow up, I actually, that's why I asked you, and I was being facetious sort of, but I actually wanted to hear your response to that, and I'd be interested to hear our DA as well as our chief deputy as well, because from my perspective, the courts, the district attorney's office, the sheriff's office, it needs to be, we need to make sure that there is a flow, and because you're going to be working closely together. And the last thing we want to do, in my opinion, is plan for something that can be problematic. If we're planning for something where, I'm likely going to be pushing daisies before we go through this again, I'd like to make sure we do it right. And so that's one of the things. So I'm glad you actually, I'm glad you said that. I think that's important for us to know and what your thoughts are. And I don't know, I'll look at the chair to see if you're interested in hearing the DA as well, the chief deputy as well. I'd be interested to hear their thoughts as well on this from a long-term perspective.
Yes, please.
From the sheriff's office perspective, strictly related to the 2 scenario A's, being co-located completely with the court is our optional scenario. We run such a thin margin of personnel that in order to support the court security function, we are frequently in a situation of having to mass deputies that are not assigned to the court security function to assist. And we do it on a very, very regular basis. And so while the Skybridge would give us some accessibility, it is still delaying a response. And when something urgent happens in a courtroom, that gets communicated to our detectives, to me and the sheriff sometimes, because they need more bodies in the courtroom. And having it across the street, go up a level across the Skybridge, and then to whichever level the courtroom is on, is really a significant delay for an emergency response to a situation.
How do you do it?
Well, my greatest concern is that in the effort to cut costs in a remodel, things like security are eliminated, and so my staff is vulnerable. That there's in some of the scenarios a tunnel across. Who has access to that? How do you get through? And is that going to be secure? Because I'm not confident that we're going to be, if we're an afterthought in a remodel, that that is really going to be taken into consideration. As far as convenience goes, it is far more convenient for the court to have us accessible. It's more convenient for us, but when the docket gets messed up and somebody needs a DA in the courtroom, it's a lot easier if you're in the building to be able to go get someone than if you're calling across the street having our front desk looking for somebody.
I literally go upstairs sometimes and say I need so-and-so rather than call. So I think that proximity is very important. We've had, as I'm sure many of you know, we've had some extensive discussions that are much more along the design line of how do you separate one of the parties from the court, namely the DA from the court. And some of the ways we've been thinking about dealing with that is some of these discussions we've had with the state public defender's office about how to put their presence in the building to kind of equalize that public perception about who's in the building with us. We've talked about design functions that have to do with separation of space without necessarily access to one another's space. But the proximity issue that the district attorney is talking about is really important on two fronts. And the one is access to us on some of our mass dockets where a district attorney may negotiate a case, go upstairs and do a plea petition, come downstairs. Going up a floor or going up 2 floors is a very different exercise than crossing a street or going down a floor to go through a tunnel or a sky bridge. So I think that's very important. And we do have some efficiencies by virtue of the fact that the district attorney is behind security, and they're behind our security, rather than trying to figure out a way to recreate a different form of security in a different building. With respect to the sheriff's office, I will say from a court's function, I think there's a statutory obligation for the sheriff's office to be in the building with us. I guess the Sky Bridge might technically qualify as in the building with us. I don't like to talk about security issues. They are, every time I say this, it maybe doesn't always sound credible, but just yesterday, I was having a discussion about some security issues in our building. It's absolutely imperative that the sheriff's office is easily accessible to us and them and us to them, because there are days when we need them, and we need them a few minutes ago. So that access is really important. And the truth is, given the funding, it's not virtually every day. It is every day. We have transport virtually every day, probably every day. We have shortcomings in the numbers there, and to make the operation work, these guys are stealing from here and there. And when we do changes of plea or sentencing on big cases, I'm always happy that there are a couple extra uniformed officers in the back who may be there to observe because it was their case, because that gives us a little extra assurance. So those security issues are really significant for us.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Sorensen.
I just wanted to make a few observations on the pros and cons of the Sky Bridge, particularly as it applies to the courts, the DA, public defender, and the sheriff's office. I think that one of the features that has been pounded, I think appropriately, is the security issues involving security for jurors and for the assistant district attorneys, for the courts, judges and court staff. And I think all of that argues for having it all in one building. But I also think that there's another part of this that really hasn't been discussed, and that is the impact on the efficiency or productivity of those public defenders and those prosecutors. If we had some space for public defenders to be in the building, and we had space for the assistant district attorneys in the building, the amount of time that these lawyers spend going back and forth will be reduced. And I think that although tunnels and sky bridges might help, they're still basically having more and more and more distance. And at least in my own experience, seeing a very crowded courtroom, a judge with a huge group of people in the courtroom, having the proximity for the assistant district attorneys and public defenders does a little more to deal with the efficiency. If they have to go 2 blocks or even a block, it's going to really lower the efficiency. And there's another issue which I believe that the judge brought up, and that is this problem of perception of justice and perception of whether or not fairness is being undertaken if the judges are in the same building with the DAs and the DAs are in the same building with the judges, but the public defenders are far away. It creates this problem that all sides are concerned about, and that is making sure that there's an appearance of justice as well. And so I think it's a really good point that it's been brought up that we want to not just have justice, but we want to have the appearance of justice. And I think that it is a situation that other communities have had to deal with, and I think that we're better off dealing with it up front. Just it's human nature that if people are around the same people all the time, they're going to develop some kind of affinity for them, usually. And I just think that we need to be aware of that. The other thing is, and I've harped on this before, so please excuse me, but I really believe that the experiences that I've had as a juror, that other people that I've known who've been jurors, that we really have to keep in mind that we do have a lot of people coming into the court system for very short periods of time, and that's their real experience with the justice system. And if they're threatened, or they feel threatened, or it's uncomfortable, we haven't done our job in terms of making sure that people are safe and they're valued and they're honored and they're taken care of when they're doing this very American and very patriotic and very necessary function of being in that role.
Judge Rasmussen?
I'd like to say two things to Commissioner Sorensen. I was trying to work in something about affinity since we spent some time together over the years in Salem. But you've anticipated something I want to talk about when we talk about the C options a little bit. But with respect to the appearance issues in the building, we are having those conversations now. There's at least some thought being given to some design concepts in which the public defender's office, the state public defender's office, would have some space in the building where there would be conference rooms for the local consortium and the local public defender's office to come in and use some space and have some space to talk with their clients. Maybe an appellate lawyer who normally works in Salem works Fridays, better yet Mondays, in the courtroom, in the courthouse here, so they would have these defense lawyers would have access to an appellate lawyer to ask questions about preservation of record or objections, that they might have some direct access to that. That would provide a better overall service as well as a better perception of the services we provide. And then I think I'll keep my other comments about the C option, because I think your point about safety and valuing everyone, including jurors, including the folks who come in for just very kind of ordinary daily business, they want to file something, they want to pay a traffic ticket, is really important to the discussion.
I neglected to question or ask about under these scenarios where the grand jury would be located, because we've been tasked with running that operation, but it's actually a function of the court. And if you put grand jury at the courthouse and you put the DAs at the DA's office, we're still going to have the issue of keeping witnesses separated, running our lawyers through, at 10-minute blocks and all of that. So.
And that gets back to a point I was looking for the opportunity to make with regard to separating some of these functions and parsing out the DA and the sheriff, that there's the need for satellite offices, conference rooms, and spaces. So you end up building additional space to address the lack of co-location at that point. And one that was really sticky when we met with you was the grand jury, because it's kind of this integral function with the jury pool, but it's run by the DA, and how do you bridge that gap? I'm not certain how it's almost more of a design issue at that point. If we have the square footage in there, I'm not quite sure how we reflect that in the details, but certainly one that would be an additional challenge, because as I recall, when the feedback from your staff was if there's the recording requirements and all those sorts of things, it's almost better to be with the courts just from a technical standpoint, from a staff standpoint. That's more challenging than having it with you, and so that's probably the the example most in the forefront when it comes to the impact of scenario A1.
The comments?
Lisa,
Yes, Mr. Cox?
Mr. Commissioners, and perhaps this would have been best right at the start. I think as a relative newcomer to the county, one of the things I've noticed is the tremendous adjustment that has occurred over time, the ability to find solutions to some pretty difficult operational elements. I fear that as we proceed and as we start thinking about this, that our can-do attitude around dealing with operational challenges in the existing structure might color our thinking. And if we have the opportunity to actually design something anew, we need to almost cleanse our palate of the idea that these are things we can solve. So as we talk about the potential for choke points with tunnels or sky bridges, what security going to look like at one side or the other, I would urge us to think broadly and not immediately start building into a building that should last us well into the future, some significant compromises right from the start. And I think that's true for all scenarios, but I would encourage you to think what is optimal. There will be a time for us to look at engineering and how we proceed and what we can afford, which is well and true. But as we proceed with this, to not design into it things that we know from the start will be functional challenges. I think it's a good reminder.
Well, I would add, from my perspective, all this information that we're hearing right now has been very good for me because, as I put my commissioner hat on, I'm looking at the two scenarios. Well, I think A1 is probably going to be a little bit more economically feasible for us, and so A1 looks good. But then, not being in the building, not watching it function, and not understanding. I know that Judge Rasmussen has shared that they process over 40,000 items a year through there, and so there's a tremendous amount of work in anything we do, which was pointed out by the district attorney and the sheriff. Anything that we do that reduces that efficiency is going to just cost more money and take more time. So, I think, for me, this has been very valuable, just the conversation we've had so far, so I appreciate it. Comments? Commissioner?
Just briefly, Mr. Rickoff, you point out something that's really important, that we have gotten accustomed to dealing with the inadequacies that we currently have. Because I think people who've been here longer than me have been living with them long enough that they don't want to see it repeated. So I think your urging and your caution, while well-founded, I think Judge Rasmussen and D.A. Perlow probably don't want to see the things repeated that they are living with today.
Commissioner Leichen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. But on scenario A, that's the one scenario that we have actually control. Scenario B and C, we need to make sure that we have a partner who's on board. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah. So, and I do very much appreciate Sarah being here and Denny being here and City of Eugene senior staff. I think that's important. Mm-hmm. And so they can kind of hear maybe what the board's thinking. But the reality is, that's the one that we have the most control on is scenario A. And so I think going through this process, and right now there's no doubt that we do have a partner at the table, and I think it's great. And that's important. But our priority is going to be the courthouse. That's really our priority. I, as much as anybody, want to see a vibrant downtown Eugene. I think that's key. It's important. I know there's a lot of folks in the business community that like to see it. I had a very good conversation with, to me, one of the real senior commercial realtors in this community this week, in fact, just on Monday. And, he really likes the fact that the county and the city are talking about this, that there's some real opportunity here and that there's a real vision. And I think that's really, to me, that's from when you look at the big picture, I mean, I'd like to see that as an elected official. But as our first priority, the thing that we are, challenged to do is to build a courthouse. And so, I look forward to the ongoing conversation, especially with the city of Eugene and with the Eugene City Council. In particular, I think if we were dealing with John, Sarah, and Denny, maybe it'd be a different scenario. But that's not it. They'd probably feel the same way. If we're only dealing with Steve and Greg, that'd be a whole different scenario. And not be elected. So I mean that could be the reality as well. So. I think having these ongoing conversations is going to be so key, and I like the timelines and so on and so forth. But I just really wanted to point out scenario A. That's the one that we have the control on, and hopefully we'll continue these positive conversations. Will continue.
Sure, Swanson.
Now, not everybody shares my conservative approach to political issues. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked you the last time we met, which is, do you have any numbers that deal with the cost of all of these? Because when I buy a car, I am interested in what the asking price is. There are many houses I've not purchased because they were too expensive. Sometimes I don't work for people that don't pay me enough money. So it seems like with this conservative attitude I've had, that money is a factor in making decisions. Yet we sit around a table each time and we are told we're only discussing designs and scenarios, and I'm going, okay, well that's good. I can be patient to a point, but when are we going to find out that one's more expensive than the other?
Certainly when it comes to the decision between the three scenarios, those will be fully detailed with cost. My hope was that I could give you a lot more cost information today, but the project timeline just didn't allow for it. We worked till late last night and really trying to work to provide you something that we just don't have the validated data that we're confident we'll bring forward to you at this point. I'm hopeful, and we're open with the expertise and the familiarity with the initial numbers that we have to be responsive to questions with regard to cost between the A1 and A2 scenarios now, B1, B2. I try to share a little bit of that up front, but the final report, November 14th, we've got our cost consultant in Portland, and that's when all that data will fully be detailed, validated, and brought forth. So this meeting's just ahead of that.
I'd just add, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Sorensen, that our contract, the city and county's contract with Cameron McCarthy, allows for three options to be vetted in terms of the cost. So what we're trying to do today is get from 6 down to 3 so that we can get that detailed cost estimating done. What I heard Brian say at the beginning, and you can correct me if I misunderstood this, but as you look at the difference between, because really your decision point today is what do you prefer, one or two of each of these scenarios, and not really making a decision about A versus B or C or so on. That what I heard you say is that we don't see a significant difference between the costs of renovating the existing courthouse or rebuilding or incorporating that square footage into, for example, A1 and A2. There's not a significant cost savings by renovating the existing courthouse versus building the full-scale 140-foot.
Correct. And you did hear me correctly. The additional detail I'd add to that is that's assuming a remodel that brings the existing courthouse up to current standards and extends its life for a reasonable period of time. So seismic, asbestos abatement, new facade. When you start incorporating all those elements, which we've been doing over the course of the last few days and into last evening, that cost to remodel the courthouse quickly approaches, if not surpasses, the cost of new construction in the new courthouse building for their offices. The alternative is with all due respect to my coworkers, you leave them in there and you do something a lot more modest for them. You can start making that math look a little different. But based on our assumptions that we're using is that we, we'd reimagine that building and transform it into something that's going to have a service life of equal amount of time to the new courthouse to accommodate those functions. And that cost is what that determination is based off of.
And so again, the goal then is by November 14th, that when you're faced with a decision between three scenarios A, B, and C, that you're going to have the detailed cost estimates between those three scenarios to be able to make a decision.
I have a question about the communications for the new building. When you look at the amount of money that we're spending on telephones, I'm wondering if there's any thought to going to some of the new technologies that allow people to use their cell phones as their work phones, and that there can be 24-hour coverage for certain offices without driving up the cost. Are you planning to do that in this building, or are there going to be phones on desks? And my grandchildren will say, "Grandpa, what's that thing?"
Yeah.
And I wonder, why is the phone stuck to the desk? Who thought that up?
Yeah. Well,
You can't go anywhere because the desk is unmovable.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an interesting facility given that the state's a primary occupant and they come with their entire standards for IT equipment, telecommunications, et cetera, and then we have our own at the county, and it's going to be a blending of those two, and whichever is kind of most stringent with whatever aspect that is, we're going to adopt, and that's part of the requirement of the 50% match. So it's certainly contemplated with regard to the specific aspects and the phones on desk. There's telecommunications infrastructure, so you can plug a phone in the wall. That's just a standard that's still current. What it plugs back to and how that operates, there's some flexibility there. But certainly technology with the adoption of e-courts, all the way up to the bench that the judge sits behind, and touch screens instead of manila folders is a real big part of what the new design is intended to capture and leverage for efficiency.
Are fax machines required too?
But the square foot costs, the gross square foot costs that we're dealing with, take into account today's technology and
File cabinet rooms or things like that.
Well, that's a great point. Greg mentions we were able to eliminate a lot of square footage in the program for things like file cabinets and storage. And because the transition to e-courts was incredibly helpful. Even in their current building, we've been able to recapture space that was previously files for customer service and kiosks where they can view files on the computer. So it's an ever-evolving piece, but I think our timing is good with the efforts that the courts have done in recent past with e-courts to kind of leverage that and realize those savings in space and cost.
I'd like to add one other thing in terms of the two scenarios, or the two options, A1 and A2. If the option is to remodel, then the construction period, I think Brian's alluded to this a little bit, it'll be an extended process, where if it were the full build out in a new court system with the DA and the sheriffs in the same building, the court can continue to operate in its entirety until this new facility is complete, then they move over there. If the DA and the sheriffs need to remain in that building to some point, then the construction and the modification and remodel of that work will be a longer, more drawn-out period. And so the completion date is farther out to be able to have the entire court completed. It could be a number of years in the future to get all of the remodel complete, and it would probably have some impact to DA and sheriff's functions while the remodel is occurring, while they're still occupying that space.
And that gets back to some of those factors that are driving the cost more into alignment for new remodel, we had to adopt some assumptions around phase construction, given that there will be occupants in the building, some assumptions around the work getting done some time beyond the new courthouse being built, so the space is vacated, so there's construction escalation factors that are taken into account. So there's a lot of drivers there. Again, going back to your point, Chair, about A1, I agreed initially that looked like a great opportunity to leverage existing space and potentially save some money. But as we take a more analytical approach and apply those assumptions through our cost analysis, it's not necessarily proving true.
Commissioner Farr?
Just a question directed toward Judge Rasmussen regarding the continuance of the court function. There's no compromise there. The court function has to continue uninterrupted, period.
No, I mean, if I can respond to that, I think one of the impediments to this discussion that we are having now, that is, I think, a great benefit to the community, and for which all of you deserve a lot of thanks, and the city deserves a lot of thanks. The earlier discussions about versions of this 5 or 6 or 8 years ago never talked about what the courthouse was going to do. And I think that's because the presumption was we would simply remodel and we would stay in place. And I think the presumption there was that people just didn't understand the volume of work we do. 15 courts, 15 judges, actually we have more than 15 courts because we have the juvenile courts as well. And it's just not conceivable to imagine how we could operate in place and remodel. It's a very large operation. We like that it's a quiet operation and it's not a lot of attention paid to it, because that's really our goal. But 100 and some employees, 15 judges, upwards of 40,000 filings a year. If you go over on Mondays, the place is absolutely jam-packed with people. So the idea of remodeling and staying there is just impossible. That's the corollary to your actual question, which was, no, we don't close. We almost never close. In fact, I closed the courts a few years ago when we had that really bad series of ice storms with snow right on the tail end, or vice versa. And my former colleague and former presiding judge called me and gave me a bad time because in the 10 years she was PJ, we never closed. So that's the philosophy. We don't close. We operate with skeletal staff, but we do not close.
Thanks, Judge. And while you like to be quiet and you go under most people's radar screen, you would not have either of those things going on if you did close.
That's right.
Thank you.
A little different than my previous life in politics, where I wasn't always quiet, but would desire to be. But there you go.
Okay. So, in an effort to kind of move us along a little bit, what I'm hearing around the table, and correct me if I'm wrong, that scenario option A2 is probably the scenario where in the A scenario that is preferred to move forward. Is that correct? And I want to be mindful that all of us are concerned, and Commissioner Swanson, with the cost component. That's going to be a critical to probably get us to which scenario is the right one. But in this instance today, can we comfortably give staff direction that the A2 would be the focus?
And I'll support that with currently we're showing county functions in the existing courthouse, and if the economics of the situation kind of dictate that that's not a wise use of funds in terms of remodeling being more expensive than new construction, we'll continue to detail that out as we move forward and kind of dedicate, or at least identify a use for that space that's the optimal from a cost standpoint. And so maybe come back to you looking a little different with the same.
Yeah, I bet it's kind of a flexible design.
Yeah, right.
Okay. All right. So seeing no objections, then let's discuss option or scenario B, 1 and 2.
So when it comes to the B scenarios, we're trying to find ways in which we can cohabitate the city hall block with the city. Again, the decision point from the courthouse standpoint is very similar. Same cost drivers in remodeling the existing courthouse and trying to mitigate the size of the existing courthouse. In this instance, we're able to achieve such a large floor plate on the lot that to have the DA and sheriff remain in their current location. It only eliminates a single floor, I believe, between the two scenarios. So it's really not an architectural impact if that's from that standpoint. The connectivity between the two buildings is obviously a lot more difficult to achieve and even less functional than what we described going across Pearl Street. So that's obviously an operational impact. And then getting back to the economics of the remodeling existing courthouse, as we take a more and more specific cost estimating approach to it, isn't necessarily proving out. So the same primary cost drivers as with the A scenarios.
Right. And again, the Sky Bridge is, and we've heard that as far as like either co-locating or having that Sky Bridge is almost a block long. And so that's a daunting, trip for both the DAs and the sheriff to be able to, certainly for the sheriffs for emergency response, to be almost a block away with this scenario. But it does reduce the overall scale of the building. It's a design issue to figure out how the Sally Port works within this scenario, but we were envisioning that we'd probably access off of Pearl and drive through the building and then exit out under the building and then go through, exit out on High Street to be able to loop back up to 6th and then or 5th and then go to the jail that way. So down Pearl and through that. So the Sally Port would be on the north side of the City Hall building on this scenario.
Is scenario B an option that the city and the courts do not like? Is that a fair statement?
So here are my prepared remarks on that topic. Because I've been thinking about this, and I really value the working relationship I've had for a long time now with the county. But I really never had that much interaction, either in my time in politics or my time in the court of the city, and I've really come to value that relationship tremendously too. So here's what I'd like to say in response to that question. Also your earlier comment about safety and treating people with value and respect. And I think this also addresses Commissioner Farr's question of a moment ago. Courthouses really exist as places where the people exercise their rights. And every day, as I pointed out, we do lots and lots of work. And the variety of that work is tremendous, really. Some people are coming in to pay traffic fines. Some people are coming in for traffic court. Some people are coming in to file small claims cases. Some people are coming in to obtain domestic violence protective orders. And not to mention the things we see in the press more often and the more standard civil things. So the variety of our work is really tremendous. And the courts are where people exercise those rights. Their right to a fair trial if they're accused, their right to seek redress from another party, and the right that the public has to come and observe the public justice system being conducted in public. And for our system to work, and for the courthouse to work, we have to protect the rights of all citizens, which means we have to be open all the time. And that means, in turn, that people who are coming in who are concerned about their immediate safety have access to us. People who are coming in to exercise their right to a trial who are accused, we have to protect those people's rights, along with the rights that the people have via their elected official to prosecute those who are charged with crimes. We have to be certain that the court is open to the public and accessible to the public, and that it is secure for the public. That is for those who are coming to observe, those who are coming to participate. That includes jurors, that includes staff, and that includes judges. I acknowledge that educational outreach and that discussion of public issues in the public square is an extraordinarily important thing in our community, perhaps especially in our community, but it's a valued American tradition. Emotions often run very high in those situations. They often run very high in courtrooms. In fact, the security issues that we tend to understate at this table, not only in criminal cases, but in domestic relations and domestic violence accusation situations, are very, very highly charged. And I point all this out to simply say this, I guess. I think there are greater challenges with this idea of co-locating City Hall and the courthouse than probably I initially identified in thinking about this issue. I have to be worried about issues like we do not close. We have to create a safe access and exit point for jurors, prospective jurors, witnesses. All of those things create a different level of need for security and access. It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different than the City Hall. And I do have a lingering concern that there's an element of incompatibility about us being co-located because of those concerns. I'm not saying those are not insurmountable problems. I'm just not saying that. We've had a similar discussion about co-locating with municipal court, security issues, etc. Those are the kinds of issues that really need to be acknowledged and discussed, and I just want to be sure that in this context we have a full understanding of how those issues could implicate the operations of the courts by co-locating a couple of governmental agencies, namely the state and the city in these examples, that might not be as simple as first blush would tell you. So that's my best effort at a response to your question, Commissioner.
And the other half, would either of you care to give a perspective? Because it seemed like the city doesn't want a city hall to be dwarfed by a building that's 3 times its size surrounding it, and that's like, what does that say to the public, that the city is not as important as the state, or?
And I think that was an initial concern that was heard early on, and I have not heard that concern voiced with any deep emotion. I think what we are continuing to hear is the city hall is needed as a civic center, a public space that does allow and permit the celebrating the milestones in the life of a community, be it protest, be it mourning, be it celebration, but a creation of place that has civic life to it, that when people come with drums and picket signs, they know where to find their electeds. So I think as we've had conversation, it's been, how do we have a justice center with its commitment to serve in a timely and open manner with the safety and security it needs, with a civic heart of the community that really wants to serve as a gathering for all, and occasional place where, or maybe more than occasional place where protests where the voice of the people can be heard loud and clear. How do those work together? So that's been the concern I think we've heard more of than any issue of size compatibility. And I look to my friends in the city for verification if that's a fairly accurate description of the challenge of the shared place.
Okay. Other comments, questions?
Brian, was there anything?
No, I really appreciate the judge's remarks as well as yours. There's a lot we can work on through architectural design, and when we're just trying to get to the point where I think there'll be some work over the next couple of weeks to help identify some of those potential conflicts and issues, so we have a good starting point if we choose to pursue it, but no showstoppers just yet.
Okay.
2 short comments. I certainly can't speak as eloquently as the judge and Greg just did to the issue, but as the sheriff is responsible for the courthouse portion of maintaining control within that, so we would share some of those same concerns as far as potential challenges. And I will leave that at there. And then the other thing that I think I addressed in scenario A, but of these 6, if there is ever one that I could get you to discard, it would be B1. That block-long tunnel just isn't functional.
Commissioner Kern.
Could we see the picture of the slide of the massing perspective of that one, showing the building sizes in relationship to the slide, this slide right here?
This slide?
Yeah.
The massing, I mean,
Just
rotated?
no, the one that shows it in relationship to the other building heights.
Yeah, so I think
Are you talking about, you're not talking about this scenario, you're talking about this scenario.
I don't think I can make it.
Yes, go. Okay. Judge Rasmussen.
Mr. Chairman and members of the commission, I've got another obligation I'm late for. I need to go to that. I just want to thank you again for the opportunity to be here, and I want to thank the city for being here, too.
Okay. Thank you so much.
One bell rotate so you can see the massing.
Thank you.
That was the, there you go. Yeah, so that puts the city hall in perspective as far as size. It's not 3 times the size, it's more like 6 times the size.
Well, in terms of the holding, the whole overall mass. But it's basically a 4-story building for City Hall and about a 5 stories. But again, the floor heights for the courts are considerably taller than the office building for City Hall.
Yeah, that's one of the drivers in building heights is given the courtroom floors and the spaces within them. You'll see the top 2 floors here are taller than the standard office floor, if you will. And so, when we compare 5 stories versus 6 or whatever that might be, there's some of those stories that are larger than others, so that kind of comes through in the massing.
Can you see how tall that building is?
And one last question on that, Brian. The parking scenario has 120 spaces and 134 spaces in B2, yet the sally port is underneath. Is that taken into account?
No, the sally port would be on grade.
Oh, beyond grade.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, it's a design issue to figure out where the sally port and how that would work. But there needs to be service access and to get to the north side of service for City Hall, so there would be a shared drive between the north side of City Hall and the south side of that. And probably exit out. There might be an exit somewhere along High Street. But the building height here, it's 78 feet, 76 feet, 78.
And the Hilton is how tall?
The Hilton is about 110, I think. I think it's about 110.
So, I mean, based on past council and board discussion, I think the L-shaped, if you will, scenario came forward as an attempt to mitigate the height, so to address any potential concerns about the compatibility of City Hall Phase 1 and the courthouse. And you kind of see that it's fairly effective in bringing that height down, so that they're somewhat more compatible. So that's been positive. And just to clarify your point, the sally port and all that is included in the 240,000 square feet.
Right.
The parking, it kind of grows and shrinks based on what's available to us, and then there'll be that analysis through the design about what's cost effective, what's necessary, what's the optimal mix there.
It's really about the amount of parking we get under the building within the building footprint. We could do a parking deck farther out underneath the side area, but because of waterproofing and some of those issues, it's not as cost effective as if you were to do it within the shell of the building.
Thank you.
Great. Carlo, do you have anything you'd like to add on this scenario?
I would ask you to discard option 1 as well.
All right.
That was the conveyor belt.
And I just want to make sure we're just focused on the courthouse.
Right.
So the difference is between, just because it sounds like we prefer B2 of that option, doesn't mean that it gives any direction as to what the city may be considering for their options.
Yeah, from a task force perspective, we're very interested in your perspective on the courthouse aspects of these scenarios. Certainly, kind of what we're in the driver's seat on. Conversely, I mean, that doesn't preclude you from offering your opinions on the City Hall pieces as well. They're meeting tomorrow, and anything you'd offer up, I'm sure staff would take into account here as they prepare for that meeting.
Okay. Mr. Sorensen.
So On B2, where does the DA and sheriff's office go?
It would be within the teal massing, if you will, on the city hall block. It would be within that courthouse building.
And the difference between that and B1 is that the height of the new building would be lower, and there would be this long corridor, sky bridge, and the DA and the sheriff would still be where they are now.
That's correct. All right.
So you can see the volume change between, this is the B1 with the Sky Bridge, B2, all together.
Yeah, I see.
And it would, this scenario in terms of the impacts to City Hall, and if you're co-locating on the same block, there would have to be a little bit more redesign. On the A scenarios, City Hall can move forward in this spring with the project as designed, and they can begin construction this spring. It would be delayed to kind of do some consideration and redesign of this to anticipate the future courthouse site. So there would be a delay on the City Hall's work and some redesign costs associated with accommodating a site which would support the court as well.
The building that the city put the bid out on that was going to be built, except for the cost, was that going to be occupying that same space?
Yes.
No, not more than that space.
No, that's the space. Only in the A scenarios, if you go your separate ways, court goes to the butterfly lot, then they could move forward with however they decide to develop their site. But the footprint of where the City Hall is located is approximately the same location as the A scenario. It just would take a little bit more work to work that with and anticipate the future court on the same block.
Yeah. Well, I think that the DA and sheriff and judge have all given their reasons of why B1 is not a good option for the courts and the county function that's involved with the courts, and I agree. Sounds like B1
Is off the table.
yeah.
And I think it would be slightly a little bit higher because of that extended Sky Bridge. We have to kind of verify that, but I think that's an additional cost that certainly isn't to bear on this. And also, since the remodel of the old court to accommodate the DA and the sheriffs, it's really a wash again.
Okay. Any further comments on the scenario B? I believe what I'm hearing is B2 is the preferred one to work more on. So scenario C, we know it's the same for C1 and C2.
Correct.
But I do think that if folks have comments, it's unfortunate that Judge Rasmussen had to leave because I know he had some comments. I'm sure we'll have more time to discuss them later, but I think this is a good time if you have some comments on that specific location that we want to bring out. Appreciate it.
Yeah, if I could jump in and probably guess at what Judge Rasmussen might have shared is certainly things are kind of evident from the outset, but to have the entire block for the courthouse and given its unique needs between the side court security, setbacks, accessibility, it certainly gives the court the most flexibility and even more so than the butterfly lot. And the courthouse is really a function-driven building. You got to lay out the courtrooms as different areas of circulation, secured circulation, public circulation, in ways that are the most efficient. And to have an entire block to achieve that is certainly going to be more easily achievable than some of the other siting that we've explored here. So Scenario C provides an exciting opportunity, kind of in terms of certainly demands a lot more coordination, collaboration, and deal making than Scenario A. So it's an ambitious concept to pursue, but something that has enough compelling benefits for the courthouse project and potentially the City Hall project that we're excited to detail it out for you.
Okay. Commissioner Ledger.
Oh, just very quickly, C1 and C2, the difference between the two basically is that C1 is a renovated old courthouse and C2 is a rebuilt old courthouse. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, from the perspective of the city's options, and again, based on the cost data that we're obtaining, there may be some influence in their decision making on that front, and how they want to allocate their or locate their phase two. But really, when it comes to the existing courthouse under these two scenarios, one imagines a renovated courthouse, the other one more of a purpose-built phase two.
So if I, Commissioner Lincoln.
Go ahead.
So I would just add that, once again, we've just kind of focused on the county component at this point, and it appears we've chose the scenario where it's a standalone building for all the functions in each scenario. So it does leave for the city's discussion the fact that we have the courthouse that could be either remodeled to meet needs or as option C2, a complete new structure. So I think that we've kind of left that as a discussion point for the city and or us in the future.
And I do think, given the direction we've received here, it does kind of open the opportunity for the PSP and the existing courthouse to. It opens opportunities for co-located government services, city and county, that we can more fully explore as part of our work.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to ask about another aspect of the various options, and that is what happens to the Lane County Courthouse and the Lane County Public Service Building under the 6 options? In other words, does it get turned into some other kind of building? Does it get torn down? Does it get sold and rented out to somebody else? What happens to this big chunk of real estate?
Right, so the public service building and the courthouse, which, just to make it clear, are 2 separate buildings. It's not necessarily evident when you're in them. So the public service building has a number of functions, including our data center and some infrastructure to it that really makes it a vital asset to the county. It makes it difficult to say, hey, you're moving out, you're moving in. I mean, there's some core functions here that kind of are anchored here. There is some excess, I won't call it excess vacant space currently. We have some planning around occupying those spaces with other county functions in the long term. So the public service building in all our capital planning has been the primary county public service building for the foreseeable future, with some space allocation modifications that are outside the scope of this effort.
It doesn't change in any of this?
None of these changes, yeah. And now the county courthouse, the existing county courthouse, given the direction and discussion we've had here, is essentially a blank slate under the scenarios that we're pursuing. Now, whether the city sees an opportunity that they'd like to leverage that space for city functions, or if there's other opportunities that we can pursue, that's very much open for discussion at this point.
Couldn't we lease it to the city or to another entity if we didn't really know what we wanted to do?
Right.
Are there county buildings or county leases that we could get rid of and move back in?
There are, and even beyond county leases, there's certain properties that we own that have county functions in that we might be more cost effective for us to have them here instead of at a remote location. And so there are some very specific functions that we look at. Our sense is that we could accommodate that in the PSB without even taking a look at the courthouse. So the courthouse really is under these scenarios, becomes an opportunity for complete redevelopment or reimagination.
Obviously, the sheriff and DA that are in the existing Lane County courthouse, under the board's preferences, they'd be going as a block wherever the courts go.
And then that kind of the economics of a remodel, even, whether it's we look at the DA shop or private, the redevelopment for private functions or other county functions essentially remains the same. So it may be that we're looking at opportunities for redevelopment in that location, whether it be private, public, or whatever that may be. So we'll try to frame that discussion the best we can as part of the final work product.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to me, when I look at this scenario, this is the scenario that is the grand vision. This is, that's how I view this. It's probably, if everything worked out in perfect harmony here, this would be my ultimate preference. And because I think when you look at, and again, if we heard from Judge Rasmussen, I'm guessing that he feels, the feeling is this is functional. This is functional for him, for his work. It's functional for our public safety folks, but it also creates that grand vision of downtown where, and it's been my experience on the private side, that once you have the government agencies creating this grand vision, it also begins to spark even stronger interest from the private sector for development. And I hope folks are watching the parking lot at Whole Foods. I mean, that is packed, and that includes on Sundays. Because we went there to have lunch on Sunday, and it was hard to get through and go through the lines and actually find a place to sit. So I think that this is the one where people look and say, look, it's county and the city, we're creating this grand vision, along with the functional pieces that we're required to be involved in as far as a courthouse is concerned. And ultimately, this would be my ultimate number one preference. There's no doubt about it. If it works. And if it doesn't work, then obviously we have our other options that we can potentially look at. But this is the one I think that really could potentially set the not only now, but into the future, really a really positive tone for what this downtown core could look like into the future. So frankly, I just want to say thank you to all who's been working on this and kind of coming up with these creative ideas from the city, from the county, obviously our consultant, who I really appreciate his work on as well. To kind of come up, can it be tweaked? Of course it can. There's no doubt about it. We've learned more about traffic patterns and pedestrian patterns and all sorts of things, but this is really to me, this is the ultimate of what it could look like. And hopefully this is where maybe all the partners can have some sort of agreement. This is where we want to go. And I'm one commissioner, one elected official. We have a whole group of elected officials, so I'm one out of 13, 14. So that's my thought on this. But this is really good work, and it's also good work from all the scenarios, by the way. You're giving us some really strong options here. And it's also good to hear from the presiding judge or DA in the sheriff's office about the functionality, what this all means, and how it will work. But this is really, I just want to say thank you for the good work. And Commissioner Stewart and Commissioner Farr, you've been involved in this. Big thanks to both of you as well for being the voice of the board. This is good work that we're all doing here.
Commissioner Farr.
Thanks for saying that, Commissioner Black. And then I got to tell you, I'm going to reflect all the work. The work is over there and over there. We just kind of sit around listening to what they say. But the one thing that I want to point out is, Commissioner Chair, you said we're here to talk about the courthouse. And option C, the courthouse is the same, both options. But what I wanted to say about City Hall, and I can say this because I spent 10 years going into City Hall. And 9+ of those years were going into the old council chambers, which had a wonderful feel to it. And I want City Hall to look like City Hall. I want it to be someplace when people go in there and go, wow. That's what I want. I don't always get what I want. And I'm looking directly at you, sir, and I'll look over you. But, that's my dream for City Hall. And, maybe C is the one that gives us that greatest option for a City Hall that from any direction you're standing, you look and say, that is a City Hall right there.
Very good. Other comments? So, I guess my comment here is that, all of us, I believe, want to make sure that we do this right. We have an opportunity. We're working towards a vision and an opportunity. And for me, it's important to understand that what we're working towards is something that's going to have hopefully a 75 to 100 year lifespan, if not more. And so it's important that we do it right. And I really appreciate the entire process that we've been involved with, and thankful for where we're at today. And I'm sure that as we work towards the November 14th, that it's hopefully just going to continue to get better with the input and the thoughts that have taken place. As I said earlier today, today's meeting has been very good because, as a commissioner that, takes the conservative approach, as Commissioner Sorensen has said, money is a big deal. And as we talk about the money component of it, that, my initial vision through these scenarios was, anytime we can repurpose our existing building, save on square footage, that means it's going to be a bottom line save. And that isn't necessarily the truth. It might be, maybe on the face of it, but when you start figuring in the ability for our courts to function with the highest efficiency, in our district attorney's office and our sheriff's department and everybody involved, that you got to start figuring out those are long-term fixed costs that we have to transfer through for 50 to 100 years. And when you start figuring in those added long-term fixed costs, then you start saying, we probably should have invested just a little bit more. We could have saved long-term operating costs. So, so again, I appreciate the conversation and being able to bring me to those understandings. So, Commissioner Lake?
One last thing, and I think it's important to have these conversations about cost. And there's nothing wrong with having them here, even though I think it's a little premature, but I think it's good to begin going down that road. But also to remind us that be careful about going too much on the cheap, because then you'll get the Dundee bypass. And the disaster that was because they chose the cheapest bid, and it turned out to be the cheapest bid. And it ended up being a complete and total disaster from a transportation infrastructure standpoint. So that's one of those things, is that there's no doubt cost is going to read into this, but I think efficiency is going to read into it as well. So, but just really good work, and I just really want to say to Faye, thank you for representing us on the task force, and of course our staff. Ryan, I know, married into great genes. So, sorry, I know Brian's in-laws very well. So, but he himself comes with a pretty nice background as well. So, anyway, thank you.
And I guess I tried to refrain from casting out comments towards which ultimate scenario that might affect the city's decisions, but I would, make one comment. We really started down this road because the board desired to try to accommodate the farmers market. And, this scenario and several of the others shows the farmers market in its current location expanded with some permanent facilities. And I think that, the input I'd like to give is that, to me, I think that that's why we started this process, and I would like to see, that location continue if possible. And we know that if option scenario A2 is the choice that we have to make, then that's pretty much rules that ability out. So, so I'll refrain from any other conversations as far as the cities, and let them make their choice. And so with that, any further discussion today? I think we worked through the scenarios, and hopefully, Mr. Gilbert, this helps you.
Absolutely.
Keep them going.
Yeah. And again, I want to say thank you. I know that Judge Rasmussen's not here, and DA Perlow, and we still have Mr. Harold. So thank you so much for your participation today, and the folks that are on the sidelines. I really appreciate the city being here to hear and be a part of the process. So thank you for adjusting your schedules and allowing this special meeting today. And we're looking forward to continuing this work. So with that, we're adjourned.
Thank you.